After that beautiful queen sack in game 1, I was ready for a game 2. If you didn't check game 1 out, do go back and check it. But here we have game 2 of the Rising Star September tournament. My opponent showed up to the board a wee bit late, but I was happy that I was going to be able to play an opponent. I had a previous tournament several months ago where my opponent didn't show up and I wasn't able to get any rating for the tournament, which was a bit unfortunate. But here my opponent played d5 after I went d4 and then brought his bishop out. So we're into a JOBAVA London. A JOBAVA London where I bring my bishop out to f4. And I've already got the plan of going after that light squared bishop. If the bishop comes out, we play e3, we play f3, we play g4, we play h5. And so that's what I'm preparing to do here. The move f3 and g4 is coming next. If they don't bring their knight to f6, then you can go for the e4 push because they have one less piece defending e4. But because that knight's on f6, we have to play the g4 push instead. So g4 comes in and his bishop's attacked and he's only got one square that it can really go to. Otherwise, he loses the bishop for a pawn. So he pulls his bishop back as he should, and I immediately play h4, preparing h5. And he can see this. He knows that his bishop's about to get trapped. And so he really only has two options. He can play h6 or h5, and he plays the move h6. And so here, I just play the move e3, and I'm completely ready to swap off these bishops. Now that the h-pawn has moved, he can only recapture that bishop on the g5 square with his f-pawn, which is going to be very good for us if we're able to do that. Now, I was just double checking, making sure everything looked good, and I went bishop to d3 here. If he wants to capture my bishop, I can recapture with queen, and I was just considering recapture with queen. Is that going to be okay for me? Is my queen able to get tempoed on d3? And I saw, yes, it can. The knight can come to b4, but I wasn't too stressed about that. I can always just pull my queen back to e2. So here, the bishop comes to d3, and he's considering if he wants to take off my bishop on d3. If he doesn't, I do think my position is quite decisively better. Not the best, you know, it's not like +3 or anything, but it is a much better position because those doubled pawns on his g6, g7 square are not good. Here I went queen to d3, and now my opponent has to have a wee think and decide how he's going to proceed because there's not any obvious moves on the board. He decides to move his queen, and this allows him to castle queenside, and that made a lot of sense. He's not threatening anything with this move, so I just decide to develop my knight to e2 and a g to e2, that is, not c to g2. I was just letting him know where I moved because he had just turned around, he didn't see. And so now my knight's on e2, and I can decide where do I want to castle. I can castle queenside, I can castle kingside, and I can also put my king on f2, which is sometimes something you do in the JOBAVA London, where you just sort of march your king up behind your pawns. I had a lot of time here. I was totally cool with just taking the time and thinking about it. And sometimes when I play Rapid Online, I'm not able to think through these positions as much once I get out of all the book theory. But right now, I'm still completely in book. I was just double checking, making sure I wasn't making any slight inaccuracies as we played the game. I don't know what's up with the camera. It kind of shows that I'm not looking at the board. It was kind of like almost like a fisheye kind of thing, but I am looking at the board here, I think. It looks a bit strange. Anyway, I think it's because the camera was placed closer to myself than to my opponents. I'll work on that for future videos. He brings his bishop here out to d6, and I just go for the quick castle, hoping that he takes my bishop on f4. And the reason you want them to take your bishop on f4 is because it lets you develop your knight for free. So they swap off a piece, but we still keep a piece in the game. on f4. Also, if we have a knight on f4, it guards the h5 square. And my whole goal here is just to push g5. Pushing g5, I attack f6 and h6. And I would really like, when I make that attack, his knight not to be able to jump to h5, which is always an annoying move when I play the g5 push. If I'm able to have a knight on f4, then he can't jump to h5. And so my position is just absolutely perfect. But here he's long castled, which I think was a better decision. And now I'm just deciding, should I push g5? The dilemma that I have in this position is that I want to put my knight on f4. And the reason I want to put my knight on f4, as I've already said, is I'm trying to guard the h5 square. So if I can get my knight onto f4, then I can push the pawn on g5. He's going to capture or move his knight, and then I can either push g6, or I can take back with the h-pawn on g5, rooks come off, and we're doing very well. But having that bishop there, it was a bit annoying. And so I was wondering, do I pull the bishop back to g3 here? I couldn't really make up my mind. g3 seemed not so good because he could just capture on g3 then, and then my knight is placed on g3 itself, and that's not the square maybe I wanted it on, although it still looked at h5. Those thoughts were going through my mind. I eventually just decided what I'm going to do is I'm going to capture on d6, which apparently the engine really likes here, and then place my knight on f4. However, I didn't need to rush on this g5 push, and I think that in my mind I thought I just need to keep going. But actually what I can do in this position is just slide the rook over to the g file, maybe rook h1 to g1, and then that prepares the g5 push. Just get more pieces involved in getting this push ready. He's never going to be attacking my h4 pawn, so I didn't really need the rook on h1 to defend the h4 pawn. But this is all very sort of minute things. Anyway, this is what we decided to go for. I don't really know what I was calculating here. I calculated something for about 5 or 6 minutes, but I was just double checking, I suppose, if knight f4 was okay. What I really need to be doing in these kinds of positions is checking like what's the most logical move they're going to make. And the most logical one I think he could make here is just to attack my knight. Don't think I even thought about it. So when he went g5, I had to have another think. I suppose in this position, what I was considering now was h takes g5. And if he takes g5, then my knight's in danger, and so is my rook. And so I'm going to have to capture his rook, and he's going to recapture with his rook, gaining control of the h file, and my knight will still be in danger. And I'm not entirely sure where I'm going to put it. Maybe h5, but then he could capture. I capture, he captures, he wins a pawn. And so I was thinking about that, but I didn't really like the look of it. If I don't capture on g5, then what else can I do? If I don't capture that pawn, I think maybe knight h5. And so I started to consider this move for a little bit. I didn't really see any other good square that my knight could go to. This seemed like the most logical response. If my knight goes to h5, his knight takes on h5. I go g takes h5. I've got doubled pawns, but then I saw, well, maybe he'll also have doubled pawns if he goes g takes h4. So this is what I went for. I do think, however, maybe h takes g5, and then when he recaptures, just retreating my knight would have been totally fine. And I could have probably put the knight on g2, and it would have been totally fine there. It just felt like going backwards, or I had wasted a tempo even jumping the knight to f4 in the first place. And here he did just take my knight on h5, so I recaptured with the pawn. In this position, my opponent moved his queen to g3, and here I had two options. Do I take the pawn on g5, or do I move my d-rook to g1? If I move my d-rook to g1, then I let him take the f3 pawn with his queen. And I thought the only real move that I have is move the rook back to f1. And then he moves his queen to g4 and I move my rook back to g1. So it looked kind of repetitive. So I thought probably in this position, the safest option was just to capture his pawn on g5. So capture on g5, then he can take back on g5 or take the f3 pawn. If he takes the f3 pawn, then I thought maybe I could capture on h6 or I could push. And that looked more interesting than just a simple sliding back and forth of the rook on g1, f1, g1, f1. So I decided to just take the pawn on g5. My opponent now had a decision to make. Does he take the f3 pawn or does he take the g5 pawn? He went for the g5 pawn. And now I'm able to actually just play f4 and tempo the queen away, or play rook to g1 and tempo the queen away. So I opted for the rook onto the open file. It's always good to activate your pieces. And here I was kind of surprised because I was really expecting the queen to go back to e7, but it didn't go back to e7. He only pulled it back to f5. And this offered me a queen trade where he doubles and isolates his pawns. I knew that this was good to go for. I was just calculating a little bit here. So I was thinking queen takes on f5, pawn takes f5. So the e pawn goes to f5. And then I could probably put my rook onto g7, attacking his backwards pawn. And then the other rook could come to g1. It looked pretty nice. And I kind of had a big feeling that my position was probably winning now. So he promptly recaptured after I took his queen. And I played my rook up to g7. Here the engine actually really liked knight to e2. And that just enables another piece to get into the game because my knight on c3 really isn't doing anything. But the move I went for, a rook g7, wasn't a terrible move. I'm attacking his weak pawn and he needs to defend it or push f4. But here his position is not so easy to play. He goes for the move rook to d7. And this is, I think, a mistake because he should really try to keep his rooks connected on the 8th rank. And so at some point I should be able to infiltrate. I kind of had that thought in my mind. But then here I was really considering, do I just double my rooks, go rook h1 to g1 and play for the g8 square? Or do I try to think about what he's planning? And I had a little think about where his counterplay was. And I saw the move f4. I really thought if he plays f4, he can break up my center. I didn't want to give him any chance to have any open lines on my king, nothing. So I just thought, what if I just play like preventative chess? What if I just play defensively? And so here I decided on the move, pawn to f4. And this is fairly simple, pawn to f4. And if he tries to go, let's say, rook to e7, then I can just go king to d2 or even knight to d1, just defending that backwards pawn. And he's never going to have any way to just break anything in the center. He's got a knight, but the knight's never going to be able to, I mean, maybe it goes to a5 and then to c4 to attack the e3 pawn, but it didn't look very easy. Here he dropped his knight back to d8 to defend that pawn on f7. And I thought that this was a little strange. I suppose what he wanted to do was just free his rook up. And I thought maybe he's going to go rook e7 now and attack e3, but I can always just defend with my king. And so I thought now's the time to double my rooks. And we'll see what he goes for. He promptly moved his knight in to e6, attacking my rook. And this didn't bother me because now I can play rook to g8, forcing the rooks off. I have a rook on the 8th rank. And also, if his rook defends on d8, I can trade off his rook and then win the pawn on d5. I could also see that if he pulls back in this position, rook to d8, then I can just take on h8. He has to take with his other rook on h8, and then I still win the pawn on d5. So I'm winning that d5 pawn regardless. I was feeling very confident here. he decides to just simply take off my rook. Here, I just recapture his rook on g8 with check. He has to defend with his knight or with his rook. And he defended with his rook, so I was able to just simply capture. He captures back, and he captured with king, getting his king closer to the action. And now the d5 pawn is mine for the taking. I do think if he had captured in the previous position there with the knight instead of the rook, then he could have still defended the pawn on d5, but that's what he decided to go for. So I just went for that. Here he went c6, tempoing my knight, and so I put it closer into the action on f6. f6 looked really solid. Now what I'm doing is just holding my h5 pawn. He moves his knight to g7 to attack my h5 pawn. And I honestly have just a very powerful position here. I think I could probably just move my king in. I could move my pawns. But I thought a little bit about this. If I move my knight to g8, I'm attacking his h6 pawn. So let's say I go knight g8 and he takes my h5 pawn. Then I could take his h6 pawn and I'd be attacking 2 pawns. He wouldn't be able to defend them. Maybe he could defend one of them by going knight to g3, but then I could take the other pawn with check, and I knew that I was just going to go up another pawn here, so that's why I went knight to g8. Here he had a long think and came up with the move. He moved his king to g8, getting it closer to the action, and here I could see if I take on h6, then he takes on h5, and then it's my move, and I could capture the other pawn on f5, so I was going to win 2 pawns here. So he didn't take on h5. Here he tries to activate his king a little more. He puts his king on f8. And here I just simply saw I don't have to move any piece. If he takes my pawn at any point on h5, then I can take on f5 and I'll be doing fine. And he can't move his king in any closer without moving his knight out of the way because my knight holds g8. I was thinking maybe here he could play pawn to f6, but then I'm guarding the f7 square as well with my knight, so I wasn't worried at all. Here I just played c4, knowing that I could just wait for him to move. Maybe he's even going to be in zugzwang at some point. He just doesn't really have any play at all. He ended up playing b5, attacking my c4 pawn. Here I can simply go b3, defending my c4 pawn. Looks simple enough. That's what I played. And now if he captures, I can just capture back, and then it's his move again, and he's got to decide what he's going to do. He decides to move his king again, not really having any great squares for it. He goes king to e7, and here I was wondering, can I take on f5 with check? He takes with knight, and then I push h6. No, it doesn't work. But instead, I can play knight to g8. And knight to g8 is actually a really nice move because his king's in check, and he can't go to f6. So if he comes back to f8, then I've just managed to reroute my knight for free, forcing his king to f8, and my knight can go to f6 and still hold the pawn. And then I don't have a knight in the way of the pawn, and it's going to just advance. He did go for this, king to f8, and so I promptly played knight to f6, defending my h5 pawn. His king can't really go anywhere. If he wants to play the move king to e7 again, well, I'm not going to go back to g8 and repeat moves. I saw that I simply had a knight sacrifice where I could play h6. So he did go for this, king to e7. I calculated a little bit, h6, king takes f6, and not pawn takes g7, but instead h7. It looked good, so I went for h6. He had a long think about it, but then he finally took the knight on f6. His position is not so good here. I go h7. If the king goes to g6, he can't catch me. If the knight moves, I just go to h8. He can't catch me, he can't stop me. If I had taken on g7, obviously the king would have been able to retake and the game would have been prolonged. So here he just captured my pawn on c4. I don't have to promote here. I just recaptured on c4 myself. And now he moves his king, chasing my h7 pawn, forcing me to promote my pawn to a queen. King to g6. The pawn becomes a queen, and now he's in a bit of trouble. He moves his knight all the way over to e6, and here I was looking for the quickest way to maybe finish him off, and I started to see maybe there's a way that I can sort of trap his king in the middle of the board here, and so I tried to set it up. First, I moved my queen to g8, checking him. If he wants to go over to the h file, then I can just keep him on the h file. My queen can stay on the g file, and I can just promote my other pawns, you know, do something very simple. But I thought here he's most likely going to f6. He did go to f6, and now all I have to do is get rid of his knight. I push the pawn to d5, hitting his knight. His knight's going to run away, or he's going to take on d5. He took on d5. So all I have to do here is recapture. If he moves his knight, I have a beautiful checkmate in 1. He did move his knight. He played it to c5. And here, my pawn on d5 is holding the e6 square. So that was checkmate. We shook hands, and that was the game. I was feeling pretty good about this tournament so far. 2 wins, and hopefully 2 more coming. The engine said that I played with a 93.6% accuracy and my opponent with a 79.1. Honestly, pretty solid game. I was pretty happy with this. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you guys very soon. Bye for now.